Hi, I'm Sarah. And the night my husband slapped me and threw me out with my suitcase, right after my sister inherited a yacht and I got a rotting shack in the woods. I realized something was deeply wrong. They told me the cabin was worthless. They laughed when I drove there alone in the dark. But they didn't know what my mother had hidden inside. They didn't know what I'd find, or what I'd become once I did. My whole life, I stayed quiet. That night, I stopped. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening and where are you from? Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's here with me. Now, what really happened at that cabin? You're about to find out. The humidity clung to my skin as I sat in the worn leather chair at the attorney's office in downtown Bangor. The windows were slightly cracked, letting in the sound of passing cars and the occasional squawk of seagulls. Summer wasn't quite done choking the air out of this town, and neither, it seemed, was life done playing jokes on me. Marla sat to my left, perfect posture, manicured fingers folded in her lap, her pearl earrings catching the light like they were winking at me. Randall, my husband, slouched on my right, checking his watch like the reading of my father's will was cutting into something more important. When the attorney cleared his throat, I held my breath. Marla Fontaine will inherit the yacht and all maritime assets located at the Camden Marina, he read in his calm, lawyerly tone. I waited for my name, expecting something, anything that felt equivalent. Instead, Ilara Fontaine, you will inherit the family cabin located off Route 9, near the old lake. All maintenance and associated property taxes are also your responsibility. My lungs didn't refill. The words just sat there, dry and stale. That crumbling wooden box near the lake that hadn't seen a paintbrush or a working toilet since 1997? That was my inheritance. Marla's lips curled in a smirk. She leaned toward me just slightly, just enough for only me to hear. Suits you. That shack's exactly your level. I don't remember the next few minutes, just the heat crawling up my neck, the sound of my own pulse drowning out the room, and a flicker of childhood birthdays where Marla got the dollhouse with electricity and I got socks. The story hadn't changed. I'd just aged into more expensive disappointments. By the time we left the building, my head was pounding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask Randall if he heard what just happened, if he saw the injustice, if he'd hold my hand and say we'd figure something out together. Instead, in the car, he was silent, and I was too exhausted to ask why. When we pulled into our driveway, our plain little home tucked between neighbors who pretended they didn't hear the arguments, I barely got my seatbelt off before Randall slammed the car door behind him. Inside, I placed my purse on the kitchen counter, letting the silence stretch. Then his voice cracked through it like glass. You embarrassed me today. I blinked. Excuse me? Everyone in that room saw what your father thought of you. Even your own family knows you're dead weight. Randall, that's not... I started, but he was already pacing, already building steam. You think I want to be tied to some woman who can't even impress her own dying father enough to get more than a damn shack? He turned on me, eyes narrowed. You've done nothing. You've always been a burden. Do you know what I've given up to stay married to you? I gave up things too, I said quietly, barely recognizing my own voice. He laughed. Yeah, like what? Your mediocre little job? Your dreams of writing a book no one would read? Then it came. His palm, fast and sharp across my cheek. The world didn't spin. It didn't need to. The stillness that followed was worse than any whirlwind. I stared at him. His chest rose and fell like he'd just won a fight. He walked to the hall closet, pulled out my suitcase, tossed it onto the living room floor. You want to act like a victim? Fine. Go live like one. Go rot in that garbage shack your daddy left you. My hands shook. I bent down and touched the handle of the suitcase. It felt colder than anything I'd touched all day. He walked away, leaving the front door wide open. Outside, the night was settling in, air thick with crickets, streetlights flickering. I looked at that suitcase. I looked at my life. And I knew I couldn't sleep here tonight. Not under this roof. Not beside this man. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have a full tank of gas. But I had somewhere to go. That cabin. I dragged the suitcase across the driveway, the wheels scraping on the asphalt as if echoing every insult I had swallowed that night. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of eerie quiet that makes even the breeze feel personal, like it's watching. A couple of porch lights were still on, casting long shadows across their owners' freshly trimmed hedges. I could almost hear their murmurs behind closed blinds. Is that Alara? What happened this time? I didn't care. Or maybe I did, but I was too tired to process anything that wasn't about putting one foot in front of the other. The air was thick, pressing against my skin like a damp blanket. Maine summers had a way of turning the night into soup. I paused at the edge of the driveway, looked back once at the house, our house, that I was no longer welcome in. Then I turned toward the road, toward that forgotten piece of land everyone pretended didn't exist until someone needed a scapegoat. The cabin. With every drag of the suitcase, I felt the weight of everything I didn't say, every time I kept the peace when I should have shattered it. Randall's voice echoed in my ears. You've always been a burden. The streetlights faded the farther I walked. The cracks in the sidewalk gave way to gravel shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low and mean, like it was warning me to turn back. But I didn't. I kept going, step by step, suitcase wheels catching on pebbles, jerking my arm like it was resisting too. The trees grew thicker, taller. The asphalt gave up entirely, replaced by a narrow road barely wide enough for one car. My flip-flop caught on a root sticking through the dirt, and I stumbled, catching myself against a mailbox leaning sideways. It hadn't seen mail in years. I recognized the turnoff even in the dark. The wooden sign, once proudly painted Fontaine Retreat, now hung by one rusted chain, the other side dragging on the ground like it had given up trying to stay upright. I turned in, tires from long ago barely visible under moss and overgrowth. The path was more memory than road. It started raining. Not the dramatic movie kind of rain. It was slow at first, lazy even, like the sky was unsure if it wanted to commit. Then it came harder. Sheets of it, loud on the suitcase, cold on my skin, soaking through my shirt in seconds. I wanted to cry, scream, beg the night to cut me some slack. But all I could do was keep moving. The suitcase caught on a root and flipped. It burst open, spilling my clothes into the mud. I dropped to my knees, trying to shove them back in, rain smearing the mascara still clinging to my lashes. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't, I might start screaming and never stop. One t-shirt clung to the handle, ripped at the seam. I left it. The rain lessened as I neared the bend in the road where the trees opened up. I saw it, barely illuminated by the distant moonlight. The cabin. It stood the same way I remembered it as a child, slouched, angry, forgotten. Shutters dangled like broken arms, the front steps warped, one of them likely to collapse if I wasn't careful. Paint peeled off the siding in long, curling strips, but it was still there. I stood there for a moment, dripping, breathing hard. Every instinct told me to turn around, to go anywhere else. I wasn't welcome at Randall's, clearly. And Marla? Please. She'd laugh me back into the street. Go live in the trash, his voice echoed again, this time mixing with Marla's smug whisper. Suits you. I walked up the steps. One creaked, another buckled slightly under my weight. I reached for the door, expecting it to resist, but it opened easily, too easily. Inside, it smelled like damp wood and dust. The air was stale, but not untouched. There was something else. Coffee? No, not quite, but something Earthy. Recent. I stepped inside, squinting through the dark. I reached for the light switch, flipping it more out of habit than hope. Nothing. Of course. I dug through my purse for my phone, turning on the flashlight. Dust motes floated in the beam. The room was just as I remembered. A low wooden table, two sunken couches with scratchy floral upholstery, a brick fireplace no one had used since I was in braces. But then I saw it. On the table. A mug. Ceramic. Plain. No dust. I walked toward it, slowly. It wasn't cracked, chipped, or cobwebbed like everything else. It was clean. It hadn't been there for decades. Someone had placed it recently. I looked down at it, heart thumping in my chest. There was still a ring of moisture inside, like it had held something warm not long ago. I turned around slowly, scanning the room again. No signs of forced entry, no bag, no jacket. But someone had been here. I whispered into the empty air, barely trusting my voice. Who's been here? The sound cut through the silence, and I held my breath, every muscle tense as if waiting for a ghost to appear. The creak wasn't sharp. It was slow, almost thoughtful, like whoever, or whatever, was moving upstairs didn't care to be quiet. My fingers tightened around the journal, knuckles white. I waited for another sound. Nothing. Just the storm outside, wind howling against the windows, branches scraping like fingers on the old glass. I turned off the flashlight on my phone for a second, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. The lantern on the table barely flickered, the flame inside casting long, slow-moving shadows across the walls. The room around me stood frozen, except for my heartbeat, which thudded so loud I was sure someone else could hear it. I didn't call out again. If someone was here, I didn't want to alert them that I was. I moved slowly, one step at a time, toward the bottom of the stairs. They curled off to the side, hidden behind the kitchen wall. The wood under my feet creaked just the same, but this time I knew it was me. I didn't go up. Not yet. Instead, I walked back toward the center of the living room. I set the journal down and looked around, finally giving myself time to really see the place. Dust layered the shelves, thick enough to trace your name in. The walls were still covered in old wallpaper with faded sunflowers, edges peeling, corners curling. Cobwebs hung like curtains from the corners, draping the place in quiet neglect. But something didn't feel entirely abandoned. There was that smell, wood smoke, faint but real. Someone had lit a fire here not long ago, and then I saw it. Hanging on the far wall, just above the fireplace, was a picture I had never seen before. Framed in wood, perfectly centered. It must have been taken years ago, but not so long ago that it should have faded. The faces were clear. My father, standing tall in the middle, grinning with the kind of pride I hadn't seen from him in decades. Marla, tucked against his side, head tilted just right, always knowing how to work a camera. And Randall, my husband. He stood on the end, close to Marla. His arm wasn't around anyone, but they looked connected, too connected. But I wasn't in the photo, not even in the background, not even cut off by the frame. I wasn't there at all. It wasn't just an oversight. I knew my father's handwriting, his dates. This picture was recent. After I married Randall, after Marla started calling me only when she needed something. This wasn't a family memory. This was a message. I walked toward it, slowly. My hand lifted before I knew what I was doing, fingertips brushing the glass. It was cold. I looked at my reflection overlaid onto the image, hovering like a ghost where I should have stood. My eyes burned, but I blinked back the tears. Not now. Instead, I walked to the dresser under the window, same one we used to hide board games in as kids. I pulled open the top drawer, half expecting it to be empty, but nestled under a stack of mildewed maps was something unexpected. A journal, leather-bound, soft from time and wear. I pulled it out gently, holding it like something sacred. I ran my fingers across the initials etched into the bottom corner. MF. My mother's. She died when I was 19. Cancer, quick and cruel. She was always the one who tried to keep peace between us all, especially when my father and Marla teamed up with their shared brand of cold judgment. I sat down on the couch and opened the book. Her handwriting was unmistakable, looped and neat, but rushed in places, like she'd written when thoughts came faster than her hand could keep up. I flipped through slowly. The first few entries were ordinary: weather updates, things about the garden, some worry over my father's blood pressure. Then things shifted. "Marla's getting closer to Randall," one line read. "They talk more than Alara knows. It doesn't feel right." I stopped. My throat tightened. Next page. "Your father is convinced Alara will never have what it takes to carry the family name. He says she's too soft, but I think they're wrong. I think she's stronger than they want to admit." I read on, breath held. "They're talking about the will, about changing things. Randall said, she'll never fight us, she'll just accept it, like always." And they laughed. I closed the journal. The air suddenly felt heavier. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. The past wasn't just catching up with me, it had been running ahead this whole time, laying traps. All those moments I thought were just bad luck or missed opportunities, were they planned? Was I being edged out by people I trusted for years? It wasn't just that I was forgotten, I was removed. And they counted on me never noticing. Or if I did, on me being too tired to care. I held the journal against my chest. My mother had seen it. She'd tried to leave me the truth in her quiet way, but now I had it, and I wasn't going to let it sit quietly on a shelf anymore. Then it happened. Footsteps, upstairs, one, then another, slow, deliberate. My fingers clutched the journal tighter, pulse kicking in my ears. I thought I was alone, but someone else was in the cabin with me. I forced myself to climb the staircase, each creak screaming louder than my heartbeat. My hand hovered just above the banister, not quite ready to grip it. The air on the second floor was heavier, musty with old memories and the scent of rotting insulation. I reached the top and paused in the hallway. There were 2 doors, one cracked open just slightly, the other closed tight. I stepped toward the open one. My mother's old sewing room. Dust had settled across the windowsill like untouched snow. Her chair was still in the corner, thread spools faded and brittle on the pegboard. But no one was here. I checked the other room, what used to be the guest bedroom. Empty. Still, the sound from earlier wasn't in my head. Someone had been inside. I barely slept that night. I stayed downstairs with the journal pressed to my chest, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. Every few minutes, I glanced toward the staircase. Nothing moved. Not a footstep. Not a whisper. When the sky finally began to lighten, a pale gray filtering in through the broken shutters, I peeled myself off the couch, stiff and aching. The storm had passed, but the ground outside still looked soaked, the earth breathing out steam in the early morning chill. I made a cup of instant coffee with the emergency stash I'd found in a tin in the pantry. I wasn't sure how old it was, but it was warm and bitter, both things I needed. I paced the cabin while the light grew stronger. Something in me couldn't sit still, like my body knew there was more waiting to be uncovered. By the fireplace, one of the floorboards gave a soft thunk beneath my heel. I stepped back and pressed down with my toe. Loose. I crouched, fingers digging at the edge until I pulled the board free. Beneath it was a hollow space lined with dust. Something was tucked in the corner, a small folded piece of paper, yellowed and fragile. I unfolded it slowly. My name was written on the front. Inside, in the unmistakable loops and curves of my mother's handwriting, "If you are reading this, then the truth has already come for you. Trust no one in the family but yourself." That was all. No date, no signature. Just that warning, clear, final. My knees gave a little, and I sat down hard on the floor, still holding the letter. She knew. She saw it. Everything I'd begun to suspect. The inheritance, Randall and Marla, the quiet disappearances of my name from photos and plans. My mother had seen the start of it years ago. I thought I had been blind. But maybe I was just the only one they didn't bother hiding it from anymore. A sharp knock at the door startled me. It wasn't loud, just firm. I froze. No one should have been out here this early. I tucked the letter into my pocket and stood slowly. Peeking out the front window, I saw a man, older, beard graying, denim jacket with the collar turned up against the chill. He looked like someone who spent most of his life outdoors, hands rough, posture careful. He wasn't trying to look threatening, but he wasn't entirely at ease either. I opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice lower than usual. He tipped his chin. "You, Alara?" My name on his lips sent a chill down my spine. "Yes. Who are you?" "Daniel," he said. "I knew your mother." He waited a beat, watching my face. "She told me if you ever came back here, I was supposed to find you." I didn't answer. "She didn't trust your father, or Marla, or that husband of yours." He looked past me, inside the cabin. "They've been playing the long game, Alara. You don't know the half of it." He stepped back. "Don't stay here too long, especially not alone." "Wait." I moved to the doorframe. "What are you talking about?" But he was already heading down the path. Not running, not scared, just done. Like he'd delivered what he came to say, and now he was gone. I stepped outside onto the porch, the chill of morning cutting through my thin shirt. The ground squelched underfoot. I looked out toward the trees, but Daniel had vanished. The letter in my pocket felt heavier than it should have. Inside, I sat back down on the couch, mind spinning. My mother, her journal, the missing photo, this letter. Now Daniel. They all pointed in the same direction, and suddenly, for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt angry. They wanted me quiet, compliant, erased, but I was still here. I walked to the doorway, letter still clutched tight. I didn't even notice I'd moved until my eyes locked onto something in the distance. At the end of the dirt road, partly hidden by trees, sat a silver car. Marla's car. If she was here, it meant she already knew what I had found. Marla leaned against her car, arms crossed, her smile as sharp as broken glass. I didn't move from the porch. The distance between us wasn't just measured in feet. It was years of betrayal, lies wrapped in Sunday dresses, and dinners where my voice barely reached past the mashed potatoes. She stepped forward, heels clicking against gravel like punctuation marks. "Well," she said, eyes scanning the cabin behind me. "This is quaint. Suits you." I said nothing. I didn't trust what would come out if I opened my mouth. Marla tilted her head. "I was in the area. Thought I'd check in. You know, after everything. Randall told me you were being dramatic." So that's how they spun it. She brushed past me without waiting for permission. Just walked right in like she owned the place. The same way she'd walked into every good part of my life. Entitled, smiling, pretending it was hers to take. Inside, she wrinkled her nose. "Mildew?" "Definitely your vibe." I followed her slowly, jaw clenched. She paused near the fireplace, glancing at the photo still hanging above it, the one I wasn't in. "I always thought this cabin was haunted," she said, lightly tapping the frame. "Funny how you ended up here. Full circle, I guess." I folded my arms. "You forgot to mention I was erased from that picture." She blinked, feigning confusion. "Wasn't my photo. Dad must have picked that one." "Don't lie." My voice was low but steadier than I felt. "I know what you've done. I know what Randall did. You've been stealing from me for years." Her eyes narrowed just slightly, just enough to know she'd heard the word stealing. "I don't know what you think you found," she said, stepping closer. "But you've always been the one who needed rescuing. Randall carried you more than you deserved." That was it. I stepped forward too, meeting her gaze. "I stayed quiet for too long. You took the money. You let him hit me. You watched me unravel while you threw parties on the yacht I was never invited to." She let out a bitter laugh. "You always had such a flair for the dramatic. I didn't let him hit you. That was between you two. Don't drag me into your mess." My throat tightened. "You were the mess." The silence between us stretched, heavy and still. Then she smiled again, cold and superior. "You can play detective all you want. No one's going to believe you. You're living in a moldy shack. I'm on a yacht. That's the scoreboard." She walked out before I could respond, slamming the door behind her. I didn't cry. Not this time. I paced the floor, her perfume still clinging to the air like poison. Something told me she left too quickly, like she didn't want to give me time to dig deeper. I searched the cabin again, this time methodically, drawer by drawer, cabinet by cabinet. In the bedroom there was an old dresser I hadn't touched yet. One drawer was locked. I pulled until it groaned, but it wouldn't budge. Then I remembered the ring of keys I found behind the pantry, probably from my father. I tried one, then another. The third clicked. Inside were neatly stacked folders, legal documents, old bills, and bank statements. At first glance, they looked standard, until I saw the name on the account, mine, and the signature on the withdrawals, Marla's, thousands siphoned off, years' worth, hidden here, quiet. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the papers shaking in my hands. She didn't just get the yacht. She took everything that was meant for me. Every time she smiled at me across holiday tables, every "I'm just looking out for you" phone call. It was all a performance. I felt the familiar crawl of shame for staying, for believing her, for thinking I was the problem. But this time, it didn't settle in. This time, the shame turned to fire. I'd let them define me for too long, weak, incapable, forgettable. But I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. I gathered the records, stacking them in a file. Each paper was a piece of proof, and this cabin, this shack as they called it, was now the crime scene. As I folded the last document, my lips moved before I even realized what I was saying. "This is the end of their game." It was Randall's voice on the voicemail, low and cruel. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I stood there in the middle of the cabin, phone still pressed to my ear, long after the message ended. The air felt heavier than it had all morning. It was a beautiful day outside, sunlight pouring through the cracks in the wooden walls. But inside, it might as well have been storming again. He knew. Of course he knew. My hand trembled as I dropped the phone back into my bag. The edges of his words scraped inside me, that smug certainty, the tone he used when he thought no one could touch him. It was the same voice that used to whisper threats when Dad wasn't home, the same voice that gaslit me into thinking I imagined the bruises and the cold shoulders. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a shallow, shaky breath. I turned to move, needing distraction, something, anything to settle my thoughts. That's when my elbow brushed a photo frame on the shelf. It wobbled, then fell face down on the wooden floor. I flinched at the sound, heart still racing from Randall's words. Kneeling down, I picked it up. The glass had cracked straight across, right through my mother's face. Only Marla and Randall remained untouched in the picture. Their smiles frozen, their eyes smug. The photo was old, maybe one I'd never seen before, but I was in it too. Barely. I could make out the edge of my shoulder, cut off on one side, like I'd been squeezed out of the family portrait. And now, the crack, right through the only part that mattered to me. I should have thrown it out. I should have tossed it into the fireplace and let the smoke carry it away. But I didn't. I placed it back on the shelf, broken glass and all. Let it stay as it was, imperfect, damaged, honest. Everything they built was an illusion. Polished family, church Sundays, public smiles, private violence. My entire childhood was a well-staged lie, and now all I had left were these jagged pieces. I sank into the chair by the window. My body felt too heavy to hold upright. I let my head fall back, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams that seemed to bow inward. I could still hear his voice echoing in my skull. Stay in the cabin. Not stay safe, not we're worried. Stay in the cabin. Like it was a cage. Like they knew I'd figured out too much. Maybe I had. Maybe this was it. My limit. Maybe I really didn't belong anywhere but here, hidden in a dusty house full of rot and memory. A wave of exhaustion pressed down on me. The kind that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of trying to be heard and only getting silence in return. For a few minutes, I let myself spiral, let the self-doubt creep in, the voice that said, "You'll never win against them," the one that echoed, "You're weak. That's why they always got away with it." But another voice cut through that fog, my mother's, not her real voice, just the echo of her words from that letter, carved into my memory like scripture. Trust no one in the family but yourself. She knew all along. She'd seen what they were capable of, and somehow she left behind just enough breadcrumbs for me to find. I sat up. The broken photo, the journal, the hidden bank records, the letter. They weren't random. They were a map, a guide out of this twisted story they tried to trap me in. I stood slowly, spine straighter now. "They want me silent," I whispered to no one. "That's exactly why I won't be." My fingers closed around the broken picture frame, holding it tightly by the wooden edges to avoid the shards. The glass bit lightly into my skin, but I didn't flinch. Pain had always been part of the story. They just didn't know I'd learned how to live with it. I stepped onto the front porch. The sun was bright now, almost blinding after the dimness of the cabin. The dirt driveway shimmered with heat, and then I saw it, a black car, slowly rolling to a stop. Dust rose from its tires. The engine shut off. The driver's door creaked open. Randall stepped out, clean-shaven, sunglasses pushed up onto his head, hands in his pockets like he'd just arrived to fix a leak or deliver a package. But I saw the smile. Tight, icy, measured, colder than the voicemail. He looked at me as if I were already defeated, but I refused to lower my gaze. Randall closed the car door with one hand, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world to crush me. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his cuffs, and walked toward the porch like he owned the place. Maybe, in his mind, he did. "Still playing house out here?" he asked, glancing around the cabin with a smirk that made my stomach turn. I didn't answer. I stood there, still gripping the broken photo frame. The edges of the glass were cutting into my palm, but I held on. He stepped up onto the porch, his eyes never leaving mine. "You always were the emotional one. Melodramatic. Always thinking everything was about you." I said nothing. Let him talk. Let him reveal himself. "You know," he continued, circling me, "when Marla said you'd come out here, I figured you'd finally gone soft in the head. But now I see you're just trying to make trouble." I raised my chin. "Trouble only exists when something's been hidden." He stopped. That wiped the smile off his face. There it was. That flicker of rage he tried to keep buried under charm and money. But I'd seen it before. As a child, I used to mistake it for disappointment. Now I knew better. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small folder, thick with folded paper. "I'll make this simple for you. You walk away from this, sign this, and we'll call it even." I didn't reach for it. "What's in there?" He shrugged. Too casual. "Legal documentation, A waiver. You sign, you renounce any right to the estate. In return, we don't release certain embarrassing things, things that could ruin you. Even out here in the woods, I'm sure you still care what people think." His voice was sweet poison. "You don't belong in this family's legacy," he added, quieter this time. "You never did." My breath caught, but not from shock. I'd heard versions of that line my whole life. It wasn't new. But hearing it now, here, with everything I'd uncovered, it landed differently, not as a wound, as confirmation. "You don't scare me anymore," I said softly. That made him laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not trying to scare you." He opened the folder and pulled out a single yellowed page. "But if you want to make this personal," he held it up. It was her handwriting, my mother's. Her signature at the bottom was unmistakable, even through the blur of my vision. Randall lit a match. I lunged forward, reflex, not reason, but it was too late. The paper caught like dry leaves, curling, blackening. Flames licked the ink until her name vanished. He dropped it on the porch boards, and we both watched it burn to ash. My knees nearly buckled. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I let the silence carry all the grief, all the rage, all the things I no longer needed to say. "Oops," he said, brushing imaginary soot from his fingers. "Guess that's that." He stepped back down to the gravel drive, satisfied with himself. I stayed frozen in place, the charred scent clinging to the air like a memory that wouldn't leave. As the black car door opened again, Randall called over his shoulder, "Next time I won't be so polite." Then he drove off, tires crunching over stones, fading into the golden light of late afternoon. I stood on the porch long after the dust settled. For a while, I didn't move, just listened. The wind, the trees, the ghost of my mother. Then something caught my eye. A piece of paper. Half burned. Caught between two boards where the flame hadn't reached. I bent down, heart pounding, and gently pulled it loose. The words were smudged, but still visible. And what I read made my blood run cold. It read, in my mother's handwriting, "The cabin holds everything you'll ever need to expose them." I stared at the scorched paper, its edges still warm between my fingers. Her words were clear, deliberate. It wasn't just a clue, it was a command. The sky was already losing its color, fading into a deep bluish hue as the sun dipped behind the trees. I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me this time. My heart beat louder than the creaking floorboards as I moved. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I knew I had to search every inch, every drawer, every shelf, under furniture, behind the curtains. Most of it was junk, old books, broken tools, worn linens. But I kept hearing her voice in my head, calm but urgent. "Everything you'll ever need." Then I noticed something odd near the fireplace. The stones along the left side looked wrong, too clean, too square. I got down on my knees, ran my fingers along the grooves. One of the panels shifted under pressure. Behind it, dust, cobwebs, and something metallic, a box, heavy, locked. I dragged it into the middle of the room and sat back, breathing hard. The latch was rusted, but not strong enough to keep me out. I found a hammer in the drawer under the sink and forced it open with 2 firm strikes. The lid creaked. Inside, neatly packed in zippered bags, was the truth. Photocopies of legal documents, handwritten letters, financial statements. Some were signed, some notarized. A photo of Randall shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize, standing in front of a bank logo. A voice recorder. Cassettes labeled by year and initials. All of it neatly labeled, preserved. For me. She knew. She always knew. I sat back, holding a letter addressed in her cursive. If you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to say goodbye. But I wasn't crazy. And you're not either. Tears welled up, not from grief this time, but from vindication. A burst of light hit the wall. Headlights. I scrambled to my feet, slamming the box shut hard in my throat. The crunch of tires, gravel shifting, then the unmistakable slam of a car door. Another. Voices, male, low, intentional. I backed into the shadows as the front door burst open. Randall, and two men I didn't recognize. One was tall, bald, holding a clipboard. The other was younger, broad-shouldered, clearly security. Both in suits, both following his lead. Randall's voice filled the room before I even saw his face. "There she is," he sneered. "Caught you red-handed." He walked in like he owned the place, again, and locked eyes with me like I was something filthy he'd found under his shoe. "You're trespassing," he announced. "This cabin is private property. I warned you." "I have proof," I said. My voice shook, but I held my ground. "I know what you did." He nodded to one of the men. "Get the box." I took a step back. "Don't touch it." The younger one moved forward, but I grabbed the recorder and clicked play. Randall's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the cabin. "I don't care what the will says. Burn it. No one will believe her anyway." He froze. The man with the clipboard paused too. "Turn that off," Randall barked, lunging. I dodged him and pressed play again. Another clip. "Marla's been draining that account for years. Just move the rest through the Caymans." His hands clenched into fists. "You don't know what you're doing," he growled. "Don't I?" I met his stare. "Because you sure seem scared." The men exchanged glances. "She's manipulating you," Randall snapped, trying to recover. "None of that holds up. She's mentally unstable. Ask anyone." "I have her words," I said, raising the recorder. "And your voice to back it up." He lunged again, this time grabbing for the box. I yanked it back, stumbling into the hallway. The lights flickered. Somewhere outside, a wind picked up. They came after me, but instinct kicked in. I ran. I slipped through the back door, nearly falling off the porch steps. My arms tightened around the lockbox like it was part of my body. I didn't stop to look back. Randall's voice rang out behind me, booming into the dark. "You think this ends with that box? You have no idea who you're messing with." But I did, and that's exactly why I wasn't going to stop. Clutching the box against my chest, I knew I had only one chance left. To end this on my terms. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind stayed wired all night, flipping between my mother's voice and Randall's threats. The sun hadn't yet cleared the trees when I pulled into the parking lot behind the courthouse. Morning dew slicked the pavement, and my shoes left faint prints as I stepped out with the box still locked tight in my grip. I walked into the courthouse at dawn, the lockbox heavy in my arms, ready to shatter their empire with the truth. The building was nearly empty, just a sleepy clerk behind the glass window and the quiet echo of my steps down the long hallway. The air was still, but I felt like it was waiting, holding its breath right along with me. I signed in. Gave my name. Sat in the hallway with the box on my lap while a young assistant disappeared with a file folder under her arm. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. When they finally called me back, my spine straightened like steel. Inside, a judge with tired eyes and a stiff jaw sat behind the bench. A county clerk sat nearby, pen poised above a notepad. No drama, no jury, just two people and the facts I'd carried in silence for too long. I opened the lockbox, placing each piece of evidence on the table with care. "Start wherever you're ready," the judge said. So I did. I showed them the statements, the photos, the letters. I pressed play on the cassette, and Randall's voice came through like a ghost I was dragging into the light. "I don't care what the will says. Burn it. No one will believe her anyway." The judge raised his brows. The clerk scribbled faster. Another tape, another confession. "Just funnel the money through the holding account." Sarah's name doesn't need to be involved. Piece by piece, the puzzle laid itself out on that table. My mother had known what she was doing. She left nothing to chance. Her handwriting, her notes, dates, names, it all pointed to years of betrayal, quiet theft, and lies wrapped in legal paper, and for once, I had the proof. The judge sat back. You're saying your brother and sister, they altered documents, hid assets, lied under oath when it suited them. I kept my voice steady. They made me think I was nothing, that my mother didn't leave me anything. But this proves otherwise. As if summoned by their own guilt, the doors banged open. Randall stormed in, Marla trailing behind him like a ghost of her former self. You've got to be kidding me, he barked. This circus again? The judge didn't even flinch. Mr. Faulkner, you're interrupting sworn testimony. Randall scoffed. She's manipulating you. You think a few forged papers mean anything? She's unstable. She's been unstable since the funeral. Is that so? I turned to him, finally letting my anger breathe. Then why is your voice on those tapes, Randall? Why did you tell someone to destroy our mother's will? He opened his mouth, but the judge lifted a hand. Mr. Faulkner, you'll have your turn to speak under oath. If you keep this up, I'll hold you in contempt. Marla didn't say a word. She sat in the back row, her skin pale, lips pressed so tight they disappeared. No smirk now, no sarcasm, just silence. When the hearing paused for deliberation, I stepped outside into the hallway. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release, from the weight that had lived on my chest for years finally cracking. 45 minutes later, they called us back in. The judge looked at me first. Ms. Faulkner, the court finds your evidence credible. You are entitled to your portion of the estate. Full restitution will be ordered. Then he turned to Randall. And as for the matter of fraud, further investigation will proceed through the state's attorney. Randall tried to speak again, but nothing came out. His face flushed red. Marla still hadn't looked at me. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I'd ever felt. Not because the money mattered. It didn't. What mattered was that I'd stopped them. I hadn't shrunk. I hadn't disappeared. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, I pulled the broken photograph from my bag. The same one from the cabin. I took out a small photo of myself, taken last year, the only one I actually liked, and slipped it into the frame beside my mother's. It fit perfectly. I whispered, "You didn't raise me to disappear." The sky had warmed, golden light stretching across the pavement like a quiet blessing. I stood there a moment longer, letting it touch my face, letting it feel like closure. I still carried scars, some that might never fade. But for the first time in a long while, they weren't holding me back. They were just part of me. And I was finally free.